Hello and welcome back to the Career Compass. Today we're joined by Reena Singh, founder of Novap HR, a consultancy and managed service business and a senior HR and operations leader who's worked across various sectors. She's passionate about creating people-first cultures, supporting leaders to grow, and helping organizations build teams that thrive. Reena is also deeply intrigued by the evolving role of artificial intelligence in the workplace, which leads us perfectly in today's discussion when AI hires, balancing bias and the human touch. She's written on this very topic in her recent article. Reena, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Aaron, for hosting me today. I'm really pleased to be here. Very nervous, but happy to be here.
Well, if you're nervous, I'm doubly nervous. So where does that leave us? I'm sure everything will be fine, and it's an absolute pleasure to see you.
Thank you.
In terms of where to start, Reena, you've written powerfully about the bias risks in AI recruitment tools, a very topical subject right now. What first drew your attention to this issue?
So, I've always been fascinated by the intersection of people and technology, particularly how data and automation can shape human decisions. So, my interest in AI recruitment tools really came from what I was seeing in practice. So, I've built HR functions from the ground up in different sectors. I've seen both like the power and the pitfalls of technology in hiring. I first came across AI in recruitment. It was actually 2019 when using an applicant tracking system, and it introduced keyword scanning. So it was a much earlier and simple form of automation. The development of AI over the years has become more sophisticated, where it is being integrated into every stage of hiring now. So it grew when I started closely working with some incredibly talented computer scientists. These guys were like graduates from like Cambridge and Oxford. They all had PhDs, and their career history was absolutely fascinating as well. And they developed machine learning models. And through those collaborations, I gained a really good understanding of how these algorithms worked and, more importantly, where bias can creep in. So it made me realize where AI can be incredible enabler, and it promises speed, consistency, scalability, but it also needs a really strong ethical guardrail and human oversight, especially when you're managing something as personal as hiring. So when I started exploring the algorithms behind some recruitment tools, it became very clear that that data, they're only as fair as what they're learning from. So it became
Yeah.
more apparent when I began working in the tech sector. Despite all the innovation, there was a real struggle to embed genuine diversity, equality, and inclusion. So tech as an industry is still predominantly white and male, and that lack of representation often carries through into the systems we build as well, including AI-driven hiring tools. So that's where my interest grew. As a HR professional, I've worked very hard over the years to make sure that we're embedding DNI into the work we do. So for me, I saw this almost like a red flag that we're potentially going back almost a decade.
Mm.
So for me, it's about ensuring that implementing AI tools doesn't come at the cost of inclusion. So I wanted to raise awareness through my article because I truly believe that we can harness AI responsibly. It's also something that I've recently posted on through my company website. So, it requires leaders to continue having a hands-on approach while these tools are still developing.
It's a fascinating topic, isn't it? And there have been many examples. If I go back to your article about quite obvious biases that came out of the recommendations and the way the algorithms match certain candidates or prioritize certain candidates over other. So I think while the capabilities are pretty remarkable, there is obviously this risk of having to oversee and feed in the right criteria to the machines. I know that you've seen both sides, the promise of efficiency and the peril of bias. So where do you think HR leaders are getting it right, and where are they still sleepwalking?
That's a really good question. So I think HR leaders are getting it right when they see AI as a tool to enhance their operations, but not a replacement for human judgment. So the best organizations are using these systems to do exactly that, for decision making, to speed up the process, to spot patterns, and to free up time for more meaningful human interaction. But where we're still sleepwalking is assuming that these systems are neutral. So there was another recent case study by Kyra Wilson and Aileen Caliskin, and this really highlighted these issues as well. So they tested AI models across hundreds of real job descriptions, CVs, adding names associated with different genders and races. And what they found was very interesting. So, very similar to the article that I wrote back in March. Men's names were favoured in over half the cases. women's in just around 11%. And when it came to race, white associated names were chosen in 85% of the cases, where black associated names leading in less than 9% of those cases. So, if anyone's interested in reading more, it's available on my LinkedIn. That's, for me, that's really interesting that these patterns of bias were often greater than what we see in human CV screening. So instead of fixing bias, AI can actually it can amplify it, especially when the data it learns from reflects existing inequalities in the labour market. So most HR professionals have worked very hard to remove such biases. And, as I mentioned previously, for me, this takes us back a good couple of decades. So I think businesses need to focus on awareness and accountability, understanding what sits behind the tools we use, asking the right questions of vendors. Don't be afraid to ask them, how they've collated that information and who's been involved in collating that information, and that's something we should be able to ask our vendors. So we need to make sure that the data and the design teams are as diverse as the workforce that we're trying to build. We need to use AI as a partner to champion DE&I and not a shortcut for convenience.
Yeah, 100% agreed. And those figures that you mentioned were pretty stark, particularly in those cases with black associated names leading into less than 9%, I think you said, which is quite staggering. And yet the capabilities that we're seeing with AI to accelerate, to amplify, to augment, and make things supposedly more efficient and quicker, reducing that task load, which is very administrative and repetitive, you would assume by default that this shouldn't happen. It should almost be created as a level playing field. That would be the assumption. So, as you rightly say, asking those questions of the people that are designing them at the vendors, making sure that they're programming these things in the right way or without any preconceived bias to achieve better results. Which brings us on to another point, which is really the human cost and the leadership challenge. So, from all the experience you have of leading global HR transformations, how do we make sure that AI transformation doesn't just become AI displacement?
It must be values driven. Leaders need to ensure that the technology supports a people first mindset. It should be used to handle repetitive tasks, where equality may not be compromised, such as scheduling, coordination, analytics, reporting, and candidate engagement. This would allow HR professionals to focus on the emotional and cultural aspects that drive genuine human connection. That's how it becomes more about collaboration than displacement. AI in recruitment has become increasingly common. So, for example, through AI-driven interviews, that's becoming a lot more common. Something I've experienced myself, which I know we've spoken about in a previous conversation.
Yeah.
So, while it is a useful tool for initial screening, it still has its limitations, particularly in areas like detecting emotional cues, like assessing cultural fit, and understanding deeper motivations. So, this is where human judgment remains irreplaceable. As companies adopt AI in these processes, the key leadership challenge is ensuring that AI doesn't replace the human element of hiring. It needs to enhance it, and I cannot stress that enough. So, like I said, this brings us back to, many of the conversations that you and I have had. Others in the business are also focusing on how we evolve technology in a way that doesn't lose insight of core human values. And Aaron, I know this is something that you've looked into quite
Yeah,
extensively as well.
absolutely. And there's some really interesting parallels, but there are also things that are very far apart on the scale as well. So if I think about some of the AI interviews or interviews with avatars that are almost appearing on the screen as holograms, I've heard, I don't want to say horror stories, but the kind of a slight discomfort that people have had in terms of their experiences with these things. It felt very impersonal, very robotic, cold, no empathy. And I guess you would imagine that could be the case in the early iterations of the technology. But then on the other side of the fence, there's a wonderful AI super connector tool that people are probably familiar with called Bawdy AI. And the logo is the guy with a cardboard box over his head, kind of a random thing, but seems to be making waves. And I remember attending a few events earlier this year where the usual protocol to go to an event would be to fill out a very long list of tick boxes. What's your position? What's your budget? Are you an influencer or a decision maker? What kind of stands would you like to visit? What industries are interesting? And that was okay, and it probably served a purpose. But I tried out this thing called Bawdy AI before I went to an event, and it came through the format of a phone call, and it was a very crisp Australian accent, kind of asking me questions about, what's your interest in the show? What kind of conversations would you like to have? What's your real value add? What are you bringing to the equation? But it was phrased in a very intelligent, insightful way. And I thought, well, okay, there's a certain degree of skepticism here, but let's try it out. And it turned out to be fantastic. Repeated it all back to me with virtually no delay, computed it all, everything was accurate, there were no misinterpretations. And it said, okay, great, give me 24 hours. I'm now going to go out and look at who's attending this event that I think would be complimentary for you to meet with or speak with. I thought, okay, let's give it a go. And it turned out to be fantastic. It was coming back to me saying, here's a person that you should meet. This is what they're specialized in. It could be a really good reciprocal meeting. This is why. Everything kind of very clear and bullet pointed. Would you like me to write an email and introduce you guys? Or would you like me to connect you on WhatsApp? Here's the conversation. So I think I've seen other examples, but those are probably the two extremes of where it can be so useful and such a great time saver and
Yeah.
achieve things that humans can't really do in the same time frame. And to your point, where we're really focused on at August Jaeger now is having coached so many executives through career inflection points, we realize there's probably a broader opportunity here to look at the B2B side of things. So essentially one of the new models that we're looking at, having conversations with HR leaders right now, is around how do you maintain a human-centric communications policy through times of upheaval, in particular all the disruption that's happening, or the fear and trepidation or the anxiety that exists out there amongst workforces who don't know, are they secure? Will they be replaced? So how do you kind of demystify the technology? How do you lead with empathy and compassion? So I think it's a really interesting juncture in history. And kind of just to finish the point, I read a McKinsey report, came out a couple of days ago, and the big message behind that really was about the necessity of upskilling, how important it is, to ready your workforce for the future. So it isn't necessarily all about let's just cut people, let's automate everything, let's drive profits. To a certain degree, it always will be about that. But I think there's a bigger opportunity that people might be missing, which is let's take what we have and optimize the workforces. Let's
Yeah.
really enable them. Yeah. So going back to yourself, really, you've led teams through organizational change on many occasions. In your opinion, what's the biggest emotional undercurrent that leaders underestimate when bringing AI into HR processes?
The fear of dehumanization, so people feeling like they're being replaced. HR is at its core a people driven function. And when AI is introduced into processes like hiring, performance management, or employee engagement, employees may feel that their contributions, relationships, and individuality are being sidelined in favor of technology. There's also a significant emotional reaction around the idea of change itself. Change management, it's huge. Even if we're changing the smallest thing in a workplace, we have to be very careful about our approach. People are naturally resistant to change, especially when it feels like it's disruptive or when there's uncertainty about how AI will impact their own roles. And there's so much more of this that we're reading online as well. So leaders often focus too much on the operational benefits of AI, like cost reduction or efficiency gains, which is completely justified as a business. That is something they should be looking at. But there's this there is this underestimation of how those benefits are perceived emotionally by the workforce. So employees may feel anxious, they'll question whether their work will still hold value in this AI driven environment. I think the key emotional undercurrent then is trust. That trust in leadership, trust in the technology, trust in the process. Leaders need to understand that when implementing AI, it's not just about the technology, it's about the people who are affected by it. So, be transparent, have that communication, be empathetic, have that continuous engagement with the employees. It's critical. So leaders must not only explain how AI will be used, but also why. Showing how it will augment human roles rather than replace them, how it aligns with the organization's values and missions. The challenge is that AI can feel very impersonal. It's up to leaders, for us to ensure that the conversation is personal and empathetic. If leaders fail to address these emotional concerns, then they create a risk of that, the cultural fear, the resistance, the disengagement. It can undermine the very benefits that they hope to achieve, not only in HR, but throughout the wider organization too. So I think, as a business, there's definitely a lot in terms of that individual, the people, the emotions that need to be considered.
And the key word there I took away is trust. It's so important that leaders communicate with trust. They get the buy-in. People understand why they're going in that direction. What will be my impact? How does it align with the company's mission statement and the values? And so I
Yeah.
think my kind of zoom out view is that over the last 20, 30 years, there has been a welcome shift towards vulnerability being more acceptable, people being able to deal with people with empathy, with compassion. If it's an outplacement scenario, how to do it with dignity, to give people the best possible off ramp, best chance to upskill and transition. But it's a delicate balance.
Sorry, think about the companies where, communication is already an issue. So there are a couple of companies that I've been working with at the moment, and both have said to me that engagement's relatively low. One of the things that they want to see improved is that communication. But if you have a company, a business that's not already clearly communicating with the business, that's not being transparent about what they're doing, if all of a sudden you're bringing in these AI tools, then there's going to be complete fear. There's going to be a very anxious workforce because they're not then going to know what this means for them, for their roles. What's the business doing? What they're thinking? Are they then replacing all of us? And, these fears are genuine. It's something real that as leaders you have to deal with.
Very, very true. So to get a little bit more practical on this, then, so if you're thinking of HRDs and CEOs who may be listening, who want to embrace AI responsibly, what might be three tangible actions they can take this quarter?
I know I can be critical about AI, and the reality is that if you know what you're doing, if you understand your profession, if you understand your job, if you understand the legal implications, your business, how to leverage these tools, then AI is fantastic for enhancing your working practices. But you really need to understand what you're doing in your profession to be able to leverage these tools. So for HRDs, CHROs, CEOs, one involved in implementing AI, don't be afraid to grill your potential vendors. Like I've mentioned before, ask them those questions. AI systems are only as good as the data they're trained on. So it's vital to review that their data sources thoroughly. Make sure the data is diverse, representative, and it's free from bias. It's going to be difficult, but you will eventually find an AI tool that complements and enhances your business operations. Secondly, implement a human in the loop approach. So, do not use AI in isolation when making critical HR decisions. Human judgment is essential, especially in areas like hiring, promotions, and employee relations. Keep humans in the loop to ensure empathy and context are a part of the decision making process. Finally, establish clear AI governance and ethics framework. This is something that Novap is currently doing with a client. We're setting clear guidelines on how the HR system will use AI in recruitment while also identifying the human touch points that are critical for ethical practices. AI is evolving rapidly, so you need to keep your policies, your processes updated to ensure that as an organization you stay on track and you continue to use AI responsibly.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that human oversight that keeps coming back, isn't it? Let's not
Yeah.
allow that to drift so far that we're forgetting the humanity element of these transitions and these advisory frameworks. I know that you and I both talked about the idea that AI transformation should be values transformation, but how do we embed that thinking without losing business momentum?
So AI adoption doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can start small. You can look for low risk areas in your HR or business processes where AI can create tangible value. So as AI evolves, it's all about identifying specific measurable use cases that drive efficiency without overwhelming your teams or disrupting your existing workflows. If it's not broken, don't try to fix it, or don't try to then implement something which is just going to add a lot more work for the individuals managing those processes. But most importantly, don't compromise on your values. So if inclusivity is the core value of your organization, ensure the AI tool you adopt doesn't inadvertently reinforce bias or exclusion. AI should, and I've said this 100 times now, AI should support and enhance your organization values, not undermine them. I think most importantly, you need to engage your exec team and wider workforce early and often if possible. Approach AI with the intention of creating operational efficiency, not displacement. So when the leadership team and employees are not involved from the start, AI becomes a part of a broader business transformation rather than feeling like an external imposition. So this creates alignment with your own company's visions, helping employees see AI as a tool that supports their work rather than replacing it. So I think, I genuinely believe when done right, AI doesn't slow momentum. It can actually accelerate it. It can enhance efficiency. It can create a values-driven culture. You can save costs. You can do so much from it. This is my
Yeah.
personal perception on AI and how we can use it a bit more sensibly, and make sure that we're mitigating risks as a business. I mean, I'd be very interested to know if there's anyone listening to this, what their views are on
Yeah, it'd be
AI.
interesting to spark a debate from this. And what I will do, of course, is post a link to your article in the comment section as well,
Yeah.
so people can have a read of that. I think you're right. I think the starting point has to be to get your senior executive team around the table, keep the company's values, mission, and ethos as a North Star almost. In thinking about what you want to achieve, where do you want to go to with AI? It's almost a Pandora's box. It's incredibly powerful. Once it's opened up, you can't put it back, essentially. I think that needs to essentially be the guiding principle that people use when they're building out the new frameworks, looking at a bit wider business transformation. I had a guest on the podcast last week who is an AI expert in terms of the technical side, and we kind of talked about that well-known stat: 95% of all these AI transformation projects don't really produce profit or an expected result. He was
Yeah.
quite vocal about the fact that if you really dig into that, how precise have these people been? How intentional have they been in terms of the time required to really get into the weeds, scope things out, think about it seriously, free of ego, free of expectation? And conversely, it may be that there are people invited to collaborate in these projects that don't really want to see it succeed, again, out of fear of maybe being replaced or training something that would replace their role.
Yeah.
So it's understandable, but that's coming back to your point about transparency. I think that's why it's so important that everyone communicates openly about the challenges that exist and where they're trying to get to at the same time.
So I think, even something even basic, like, when the banks first introduced their machines, when the supermarkets introduced self-service, that's the first thing everyone said. They're replacing humans, our jobs are being replaced. And with AI in an organization, in a business context where it's automating your recruitment or wherever else, they are the exact same fears. But we've seen humans being replaced there in the supermarkets, and less people on those checkouts. But that's, as a business, we need to really think about, if we are implementing these AI tools, the cost. Are you actually saving cost, or you're going to have to spend so much more money on implementing these tools, maintaining these tools, training these tools? There's an awful lot of resources that are going to go into that as well. So yeah, I think there's much wider context that we need to consider as a business.
There is, and the whole gallery of human history has seen many examples, happily, where we've been very adaptive as a species. The car was meant to make the horse completely redundant, but luckily, there are still many horses out there, that provide great pleasure, recreationally, working horses as well. The telephone was meant to kill the postal service. Well, people are still sending the occasional letter, certainly parcels, and e-commerce was meant to destroy the high street, and it still exists. It's in a different format, maybe. But so the point is, I think we're going through a period of quite painful adjustment, but that's always the case. Any kind of giant leap forward of progress does require this period of adjustment. So I think the future is something to be pretty excited about. And if I could close on a question here that might be interesting. If you could write one sentence to appear on every HR leader's wall in 2026 about AI and people, what would it say?
I think, because I've said empower and enhance so many times, I think it's definitely working together to amplify human potential. AI is used to empower and not replace.
It's a nice sentiment. Yeah, it's a good place to wrap up, I think. It's been an absolute pleasure, Reena, to have you on the Career Campus. Thank you for coming on and sharing
Aaron,
your
thank you so
insights.
much.
Real pleasure. As discussed, if anyone would like to get in touch with Reena or myself after the show, our contact details will be in the comments section, along with the link to the article that Reena published earlier this year in March. In the meantime, thank you for tuning in. A pleasure to see you all, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you again, Reena.
Thanks, Aaron.
Cheers.